Good evening. That was really good timing, orchestra. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. Let's give them a round of applause. Beautiful music. On behalf of the BYU Gerentology program, I welcome you to the 28th Annual Russell B. Clark Gerentology Conference. Russell B. Clark was an amazing individual in his longevity, his optimistic personality, and his generosity. I invite you to read about his life on the back of the program. We have an exciting program tonight. Many of you have already enjoyed learning at the posters here tonight, so thank you to the students and faculty who brought these posters and shared their research with us. We'll begin with an opening prayer given by Claire Hunsaker, a Gerentology Scholarship recipient majoring in nursing. Following the prayer, we have a privilege of hearing a musical number by the New Horizons Orchestra, who will be introduced by Sam Sagawa of the BYU Music Department. Following the musical number, we'll hear briefly from Dave Nelson, Associate Dean of the College of Family, Home, and Social Sciences. Claire.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for this day. We thank Thee for the opportunity that we have to hear from Stephen Greenberg. And please bless us that we may be able to take in this knowledge and apply it to our lives. We thank Thee for the opportunity that we have to listen to this wonderful orchestra and all be here together. And we thank Thee for Thy love and Thy guidance over us. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Dr. Jorgensen, thank you for allowing us to share the stage with Dr. Stephen Greenberg, tonight's keynote speaker. My name is Sam Sagawa, and I'm an associate professor of music education in the BYU School of Music and one of the directors of the new BYU New Horizons Orchestra. The name New Horizons originates from the first senior adult band organized in 1991 by Dr. Roy Ernst of the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York. Dr. Ernst had a vision to create model programs emphasizing entry and re-entry points for older adults to participate in a band, orchestra, or choir. To date, there are nearly 200 New Horizons bands, orchestras, and choirs throughout the United States, Canada, Australia, and Europe. Incidentally, a few New Horizons ensembles give themselves descriptive subtitles such as the Last Chance Band, Not Nearly Dead, and my personal favorite, The Grateful Alive. Participants include musicians who have played an instrument in secondary school or college and have returned to active music making after years, sometimes decades of musical inactivity. Some participants join a New Horizons ensemble wanting to play an instrument for the first time in their adult lives. Motivations range from wanting to reclaim a musical identity left behind in their youth to being a part of a social group bound together by their love of music. The BYU New Horizons Orchestra was founded in 2002 by Dr. Andrew Debchinsky, Emeritus Professor of Music Education here at BYU. There are no auditions. Members come and go as they please, often taking sabbatical periods to travel, serve missions, or to care for a partner. When members return after a few days or a few years, they are met by a supportive musical support group that enjoys making music together. The creative energy that is evident during each rehearsal may be fulfilling Gene Cohen's idea that the arts may provide some of the best opportunities to experience a new sense of control and mastery as older adults. Currently, the BYU New Horizons Orchestra has approximately 40 members who rehearse 2 mornings a week during the fall and winter semester and once a week during the spring semester. The orchestra also serves as a music teacher preparation and research laboratory for the BYU School of Music. Tonight's prelude and keynote program features 3 esteemed music educators. Mrs. Allison Smith serves as conductor and co-executive director of the orchestra. Dr. Gordon Childs, Emeritus Professor of Viola at the University of Wyoming, conducts and arranges many of the orchestra's concert pieces. and Mrs. Deanne Helquist, former Director of Orchestras at Maple Mountain High School and Mapleton Junior High School. We will be performing 3 numbers for you this evening: the Barcarolle by Jacques Offenbach, Danny Boy, a traditional Irish tune, and the finale for Symphony No. 2 by Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky, arranged by Sandra Dachau. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm round of applause for the BYU New Horizons Orchestra.
Thank you to that wonderful orchestra for your preparation and contribution to the opening session of this conference. It's wonderful. Well, as Jeremy noted earlier, my name is David Nelson. I'm an Associate Dean in the College of Family, Home, and Social Sciences. And I've been asked to just share a few words from the deans who oversee the colleges that are connected to the Gerentology minor. The Gerentology minor at BYU is a joint venture of the College of Family, Home, and Social Science, the College of Life Sciences, and the College of Nursing. And we are pleased to have in attendance Dean Patricia Ravert of Nursing and Associate Deans Michael Barnes and Laura Bridgewater of Life Sciences. The Gerentology minor, as we see it, is a wise student investment, given that roughly 10,000 baby boomers are now retiring daily in the United States and throughout the world. Students in many majors, such as business, the health professions, the social sciences, law, they would all be well served to better understand the population that they will increasingly be dealing with. They would be more competitive as job candidates and better prepared to serve as professionals. So we are grateful to all the generous donors who have helped make the funds available to fund the priorities of this particular program, especially the faculty research and the student scholarships. There's a much good that is going on in the Gerentology program, and we're grateful for the faculty who have invested in it and for the leadership of Dr. Jeremy Jorgensen and all those who assist him. So we, the deans of the various colleges associated with this Gerentology minor, want to warmly welcome Dr. Stephen Greenberg, who will be our keynote speaker. Thank you.
We have just a couple more items before our keynote is to address us. It is my honor at this time to present a Distinguished Service in Gerentology Award. This award is being presented to Dr. Ronald L. Hager. Before inviting Ron to the stand, let me share a few words about him. Some of these are in the program. Dr. Ron Hager is an associate professor in the Department of Exercise Sciences at Brigham Young University. His research and teaching interests include lifestyle and chronic disease prevention, functional fitness and chronic pain, and sports skill instruction for lifetime physical activity. Dr. Hager is active in mentoring student research and regularly presents and publishes the findings with his undergraduate and graduate students. He is a member of the American College of Sports Medicine. Dr. Hager is being recognized tonight mainly because every fall for the last 27 years, since 1990, Dr. Hager has taken dozens of BYU students each year to the Huntsman World Senior Games in St. George, Utah. This event hosts more than 10,000 senior athletes, age 50 plus, from all 50 states in the U.S. and more than 25 countries. Senior athletes compete in nearly 30 different athletic events. Got a few pictures of Ron here with some students of ours and some seniors in the background there. BYU students volunteer at the senior games providing health screenings for the athletes, and Dr. Hager is providing a tremendous service to the senior games participants and at the same time helping students gain significant experiential learning opportunities. Dr. Hager, thank you for your inspirational service and example. Thank you, Ron. Congratulations again, Ron. Dr. Hager will likely be taking a group of students again in the coming fall. So if you're interested in going, we'll have some information on our website that you could check out. One last area of growth, the growth of a tree can be measured by the size of yearly rings. We have seen the BYU Gerentology program grow substantially during the past year, much like a tree would grow during a year with lots of rain. Let me share some evidence of this growth. As of this year, We hit over 350 graduates, and more exciting to me is that we have currently 225 students seeking a minor or certificate in gerontology from various different programs. We also have over 50 faculty members who are affiliates of the program who are mentoring students and teaching classes related to the minor, who, if you're not already connected with them, you might get to know. We have, of course, the minor program. We've got the Huntsman World Senior Games activity. This past year, close to 70 students went down and provided health screenings. We have scholarship and service awards. The scholarship award applications are coming up due here in a few weeks, and so I encourage you to check that out on our website if you're interested. And then we have some poster awards at the Mary Lou Fulton Undergraduate Research Conference. We have a newly developed website. If you haven't been there recently, I would encourage you to check it out. A lot of great information there. And last, I'd like to mention we are forming a BYU Gerentology Student Club. And Evan Starr, the inaugural president, will share a few words about this club. Evan.
Good evening. As most of you have probably seen, we have some handouts for the newfound Gerentology Student Club. As Dr. Jorgensen just showed, I counted 17 majors with students who have a gerontology minor. And with so many different majors, sometimes it's hard to connect with other students who are pursuing similar goals. And so with this new club, we hope to connect students who are pursuing fields within gerontology. And also, most of these students are looking to go to graduate school after. And so we are hoping to plan opportunities to serve older adults, to help people get those service hours needed, and also connect with the older adults in that population as much as we can. And also, there are a lot of careers that we've seen of people who have graduated from this program or other local people who are working in the field, and we're hoping to learn and network with them to hopefully expand our learning of what we'd like to do and also have good connections when we move into the field. So it's very easy to join the club. You just go to the BYUSA website, as you can see on the handout at the bottom. There are no fees involved, and we hope to just get more students together who have a passion for serving older adults and are looking for a future in that. Thank you.
Our keynote address will be given by Dr. Stephen Greenberg, who will present on small vessels, big problems, the role of small vessel brain disease in cognitive aging. Dr. Greenberg is professor of neurology at Harvard Medical School, vice chair of neurology for faculty development and promotions, and holds the John J. Conway Endowed Chair in Neurology at Massachusetts General Hospital. He is recipient of the 2017 American Heart Association William M. Feinberg Award for Excellence in Clinical Stroke, and has served in many national and international leadership roles in the fields of stroke and neurology, including principal investigator for the NINDS MARC VCID Biomarkers Consortium Coordinating Center, that is a mouthful, president of the International CAA Association, chair of the NIH Acute Neurologic Injury and Epilepsy Study Section, co-chair of the NINDS Alzheimer's Disease-Related Dementia Summit Subcommittee on Vascular Cognitive Impairment, and chair of the American Heart Association International Stroke Conference. Dr. Greenberg has authored over 200 peer-reviewed research articles and over 75 chapters, reviews, and editorials in the areas of hemorrhagic stroke and small vessel brain disease. He received his undergraduate degree in biochemistry from Harvard University and MD and PhD degrees from Columbia University under the graduate research training of Dr. James Swartz. He performed internship at Pennsylvania Hospital, neurology residency at MGH, and postdoctoral fellowship at Brigham and Women's Hospital under the training of Dr. Kenneth Kosick. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Stephen Greenberg.
Thanks very much, Dr. Jorgensen, and thanks to everybody for the invitation to be here. I'm always honored when people take their time to listen to the work that we've been doing, the small vessel disease field, and I'm really particularly honored to be here, just having spent the day getting a sense of the thoughtfulness and commitment of the people in the gerontology program. It's really a particular honor to be part of this very, very special event, so thank you for the invitation. I have to thank the people who pay my bills, which is the National Institutes of Health, and also I put up here what's really only a partial list of the people I'm currently working with in this field, and it's really quite a partial list. I've been able to reconnect here briefly with old collaborators like John Wisco and old colleagues like Dr. Judith Warner, and I put this slide up not only to express my gratitude to the people I've worked with, but also to make a teaching point, which is that any kind of patient-based research is truly a team sport. There's no such thing as patient-based research that happens by one person doing something on his or her own. This is a highly collaborative field, and for people who are entering into potential future careers in patient-based research, I welcome you. We need more of it, and also encourage you to enlarge your networks of friends and colleagues. And this both makes your career more satisfying and also much more productive. It's how things get done. In my talk, I'm going to be covering three areas. So I'll talk with an introduction to this concept of the vascular contributions, cognitive impairment, and dementia, where it comes from, why we think it's an important part of the dementia picture. I'll focus in on the particular small vessel diseases in the brain, and close with some thoughts on both what individuals can do now and what the prospects are for future ways to prevent age-related cognitive impairment related to vascular disease. Well, let's start with the sort of the cold-hearted numbers, and the numbers are pretty daunting in terms of what is really the public health threat of our time, which is the tsunami of dementia. People mention the effect of the baby boom demographic explosion. So dementia represents loss of memory and functional skills with age, and it's on the order of 5.4 million Americans now, already a huge number, and this is certainly not strictly an American problem, obviously, and also not even a problem just of the rich world, also very, very much a problem of the developing world as well, which is, as it conquers other diseases, will have greater shares of dementia. And then this doubling every 20 years, and that's really driven just by the demographics. As we get good at preventing other bad diseases like heart disease and cancer, it's great to live a longer life, but it's no bargain to have that life be one that's highly impaired from memory loss. And again, if you just want to be sort of cold-hearted, the costs are also daunting in terms of what are both direct costs of patient care and the indirect costs, the foregone productive years of both patient and caregiver. And just to add in the caregiver side of it, also, again, it's no surprise probably to anyone in the audience. I think everyone knows someone who either in their own family who's afflicted with dementia, or in a family of a close friend. And caregivers are often themselves in the elderly population, and the amount of time and foregone other opportunities that's involved in care, again, is quite daunting. Well, those are the numbers, and of course, that's only one side of the story. The others, another side is the emotional impact of the disease. And I put this up. I think anyone can come up with similar stories, again, either personal. This I've taken from a collection of writings from Alzheimer patients and caregiver dementia patient and caregivers. My aunt kept her courage through the feedings, bedwettings, dressing her man like a child. The tears came only when he woke and said, "Lady, when is the time for my bath?" And again, everyone has some heartbreaking story along these lines for what it means for someone to be robbed of a lifetime of memories. And then I'll add in sort of what I call the hope. Well, this is not a hopeful slide. This is, again, that projection of the effect of aging of the population on the explosion, that doubling every 20 years that I mentioned before. But it actually wouldn't take a miracle to make a big dent in that. So this is, these are numbers from the Alzheimer's Association. It's the effect of just delaying the onset by 5 years. And if we could do only that, if that's the only thing we learned how to do, you see we'd make a really big dent in this explosion of age-related cognitive impairments. So we don't have to shoot for the moon for cures, although that's what we all want. Even just being able to push the horizon back a little bit to slow things enough by 5 years. So there really is reason to feel that this is a field worth investing our time in and understanding. So now to turn to sort of the vascular side of things, and there's a kind of an irony to the way the vascular, that's the term for a blood vessel problem, there's kind of an irony to it, which is the 1950s, and depending on how old you are, this might be when maybe your great-grandparents went to the neurologist with cognitive impairment, at least for my generation, and they were told you had hardening of the arteries. That was everyone's understanding of that's what made you lose your memory as you got old. And then sometime in the 1970s, thanks to work by a number of scientists, particularly Bob Katzman and Bill Terry, that the dementia became Alzheimer's disease. We understood that what was thought to be a relatively rare condition actually was a cause of the lion's share of age-related dementia. And that's what everybody had, Alzheimer's disease. So I've drawn this as a full circle. That's not really accurate. Alzheimer's disease hasn't gone away. We haven't gone back to the starting point. But we really have come back to the blood vessels. And so this concept that I'll be talking about in the next few slides of vascular contribution to cognitive impairment and dementia. So Alzheimer's disease is still there, but it's clearly not the lone player. And this idea that multiple diseases overlap is really the main focus of understanding of age-related cognitive impairment. So let's start with that concept of vascular contributions to cognitive impairment. And this is really, I will barely summarize what's a really rich body of research making the case, and this is work, I'll show a couple slides from excellent work from the religious order study and Rush Memory and Aging product led by my colleague David Bennett and Julie Schneider at Rush University. And so what you're looking at in these pie charts is the results of studying patients who are either during life have no cognitive impairment, mild cognitive impairment, or are told by smart neurologists that they have Alzheimer's disease. Probable AD stands for probable Alzheimer's disease. And then the pie chart is, these are people who signed up to donate their brain after death to be examined by a pathologist at autopsy and to have sort of a definitive diagnosis given by looking at the brain under a microscope. And as you go from no cognitive impairment to probable Alzheimer's disease, you see there is a little bit of an increase in Alzheimer's disease alone, but where there's really the biggest difference between the groups is people who have Alzheimer's disease plus, and in particular Alzheimer's disease plus small strokes are really the ones who are overrepresented in that group that actually have Alzheimer's disease and actually have dementia. And it's really this kind of finding that if you have one thing alone, it may not actually cause any symptoms. It's when you have multiple findings that you're really likely to lose your memory. And so what we've learned, and this is really a real sea change in the way people think, is that single-cause dementia just caused by a single entity, is actually the exception, is pretty uncommon, and it's really multi-cause dementia that's the rule. And this kind of flies in the face of the way we're trained as doctors. We always like to say people have one diagnosis. We don't like to say that there are multiple things going on. But that is the rule in aging because if you have multiple fairly common age-related diseases, they will overlap, and the same thing can be said when an older person can't walk. Usually it's not just one thing, and it seems to be also true when people have dementia. And what you're seeing on that funny-looking sort of bar graph at the bottom, that kind of histogram, is those are the findings from that same religious order study and Rush Memory and Aging project, where they just, each one of those lines represents one combination of different pathologies. So there are actually 236 of those entries, and the most common one all the way on the left is Alzheimer's disease alone, but that's less than 10% of everything. So again, the rule is to have multiple overlapping diseases. And you may say that's bad news. I mean, boy, that's really it's hard enough to think about one thing. How are we going to think about multiple things, but there is a kind of silver lining, because multiple targets means multiple things to shoot at, multiple contributors that we can potentially improve. And I'll try to make the case by the end of this evening's talk that we really may have it in our power to improve the vascular contribution. So what is the vascular contribution? What do we mean when we talk about blood vessels in the brain? The two most salient, the two most obvious kinds of blood vessel disease in the brain are either strokes caused by blocking up a blood vessel, and we use this term ischemic stroke. Anyone who's in the medical field knows it's like learning a foreign language, and everything has a term that makes no sense at all that health professionals use to communicate with each other. But the term ischemic stroke means blocking of a large blood vessel and damaging part of the brain, as shown in this scan. I'll show different brain scans as we go along, shown in the one on the left. Or the opposite, a rupture of a blood vessel. Blood vessel breaks open and allows a large amount of blood to leak out, and causing a hemorrhagic stroke or a bleeding stroke, as you see in the scans in the lower right. And those are strokes that come to medical attention because someone is suddenly paralyzed in an arm or a leg, or suddenly loses the ability to speak or to see to one side. And we sort of at least have an understanding of what that problem is, because those are people who come to us as stroke neurologists. But it's really this third kind, where there's either blockage or damage to a small blood vessel that doesn't come across as sudden paralysis or sudden loss of speech, but represents these small little, they're small enough lesions that I have to put arrows on them to point out where they are, either that bright area representing a small tiny ischemic stroke, or the little black spots shown in the figure on the right that represent tiny areas of bleeding, microbleeds. And it's really that kind of, I use the term death by 1,000 cuts that is really the problem that we're talking about. So these are diseases of the small blood vessels. What do we mean by small blood vessels? Well, it's really so much of our bodies is kind of defies belief, and one is this network of about 400 miles estimated of capillaries, of small blood vessels that interconnect. And you need that complicated network, because getting blood to every corner of the brain is really a daunting task. And the brain is, for all of us in the neurosciences field, is a very uncompromising and unforgiving organ. It's only 2% of the body's mass, but uses 20% of the body's oxygen supply. It's enormously demanding for energy, and brain cells begin to die within minutes. That's why we always say minutes count when someone is having a stroke, that any time that oxygen supply is cut off to any corner of the brain, damage begins to happen quickly. And these small silent strokes are extraordinarily common. People even who will have an MRI scan done for some other reason, about 1 in 5 over the age of 80 will have at least one silent stroke you can see, and almost certainly many more that you can't see. And what does it mean? This is from a different population study in the Netherlands, the Rotterdam study, and those two curves show the effect on your chances of getting dementia based on having one of these silent strokes. That SBI stands for silent brain infarct, or a silent stroke. And what you see is in this mathematical way of measuring the likelihood of getting dementia, more than a doubling. That HR is a statistical term, the hazard ratio. That's more than doubled chances just by having one of these silent strokes. So, of course, we don't think that it's necessarily that one that makes you demented, but that one is probably the tip of the iceberg for many more that are very difficult to see. So the simple conclusion, which is the basis of the title of my talk, is that the vascular contribution really represents small vessels and silent strokes, but causing problems that are really quite big. So let's turn to those small vessel diseases in the next part of my talk. Well, the good news in terms of, there won't be a quiz at the end of tonight's talk, but the good news in terms of taking it in is there are really only 2 common small vessel diseases. There are others that are much less common, but among the age-related changes in the small blood vessels in the brain, there are really only 2 One is termed as, again, each one's a mouthful, arteriolosclerosis, and the other is a cerebral amyloid angiopathy, or CAA. Arteriolosclerosis is probably the most common of all of the small vessel diseases. It represents thickening of the walls of the small vessels with protein deposits. It's present in an advanced form in on the order of 1 out of 3 of elderly brains that come to autopsy. And we have a pretty good idea of what the risk factors are that drive it, and I'll be talking a good amount when I get to the what can you do part of the talk about these risk factors, in particular high blood pressure and diabetes, and aging, of course, is a risk factor for all of these conditions. Amyloid angiopathy is a little newer to the scene, but is now well established. It's been the focus of our research group. And it has an interesting tie-in to Alzheimer's disease. The amyloid part of amyloid angiopathy is also the trigger of Alzheimer's disease. If it deposits in the brain itself, it appears to be the trigger of Alzheimer's. And if it deposits in the walls of the blood vessels, it's the trigger to amyloid angiopathy. Also quite common as a pathologic finding, meaning that it's present in a fairly advanced form in about 1 out of 3 of elderly brains. And here, other than age, we've not established other risk factors, no treatable risk factors, which of course really puts the pressure on us as a medical community to come up with other ways to slow the progression of this disease. It's now possible during life to make a pretty good distinction between the two, and it reflects the fact that they affect different vascular trees. So as you see in the cartoon on the left, the amyloid angiopathy tends to affect those small blood vessels out near the surface of the brain, whereas the high blood pressure and arteriolosclerosis favors the small blood vessel beds that are deep in the brain, and we can make that out when we look at where either the micro bleeding or micro infarcts happen. That in the upper left you see those little black dots out near the surface of the brain, whereas on the right the black dots are in the deep part of the brain. And this is really quite useful to us as neurologists to be able to make the cut between the two small blood vessel diseases and to reach at least a tentative diagnosis in people during life just from MRI imaging. And despite the differences in the way these two small vessel diseases are produced, they really share a lot of features, and it's the ones I've been mentioning so far. So each of them cause tiny areas of damage from loss of blood flows, microinfarcts, ischemic infarcts, as shown again by the small white dot. Another form that's not truly a death of brain cells, but a kind of a scarring in the white matter that's recognized very well by MRI. It looks very dramatic on the scan because of the MRI properties, and it gets this term white matter hyperintensities, or WMH. And then each of them also causes microbleeding, the tiny black spots on the brain. So, well, what do we do with this information? Well, this is my list of key questions, you know, the things that our group is really focused on, which is, on the one hand, how do these tiny lesions, I mean, each one is so small, how do they actually do something to impair the brain function? That's one question we focused on. And the other is, okay, I see that there's this thickening of the walls of the blood vessels, but how does that actually damage the brain? Why does that actually lead to brain damage? So I'll try to give a flavor of each of how we've approached those two questions. So the first one is, how do that large number of small distributed injuries disrupt the way the brain works? And our best understanding is it's by disrupting the connections between one part of the brain and the other. I saw one of the posters actually focuses on the same concept of brain networks as the important way that parts of the brain speak with each other. There are different ways to analyze it, and the way we've used, which is slightly different from the one in the poster, is to use an MRI technique called diffusion tensor imaging to map out the connections, to divide the brain into different segments shown by those red balls in the upper right-hand corner, and then to map the strength of the connections from one part of the brain to another. And you can create a measure from that called global efficiency that describes how well one part of the brain connects to another. And what you see in those graphs in the lower left, in our hands, that global efficiency measure is the best marker for how much someone is cognitively impaired from the disease we study, amyloid angiopathy. And if you look at if you've got good enough eyesight to make out the axis on what's the thing it's correlating with, the two things are executive function and processing speed. And those are the cognitive measures that pretty much as the rule are the ones most affected in small vessel disease. And actually, let me just mention what those are. So we measure processing speed by tests like what's shown here is the digit symbol substitution test. I think everybody can remember taking tests like this and probably hating them in second grade or something, where you quickly have to scan up to see which symbol goes with which number and fill them in, and they just sort of count how many of those you can do in an amount of time, and you're thinking, oh my God, I'm really slow, I better hurry up, and then time's up, and that is known to slow with aging. I know it in myself without having to do the test, and is particularly affected by this kind of disconnection. And the one in the lower right is the test of what people call executive function. It's not your ability to be an executive, but rather your ability to sort of change instructions from one thing to another. And it's often tested by this called the trailed B test. It's a kind of a connect the dots, but it's a connect the dots where you have to go back and forth from numbers to letters. So 1A, 2B, and you have to remember, wait, the last one I did was a number, so now the next one's a letter. Which one am I up to? And the time it takes to do that, again, is a good marker of ability to switch sets. And it kind of makes sense intuitively that if you disconnect one part of the brain from another, that these ability to make these connections quickly would slow. And in fact, that is the finding and is what is most affected. Another area that's kind of interesting is walking speed. And here, if your legs are okay and everything else, you basically walk as fast as you think, which is a funny way to think of it, but there's a pretty good correlation between the two, and that's also affected and also correlates with that global efficiency measure. When there's impairment in global efficiency, there's also a slowing of gait speed that we measure in our patients. And interestingly, memory itself is not spared, but it's relatively spared. It's less affected in the small vessel diseases and doesn't correlate as well with that global efficiency as tested by this kind of ability to learn a list of words and remember them from, and there are a lot of other ways to test this. So it does have a slightly different flavor from the memory loss that's the prime factor in Alzheimer's disease, even though these things overlap. So that's our understanding of how the large numbers affect brain function. So now on to the other question: how do the small vessel diseases actually cause injury? And one area that we focused on in particular is, again, I mentioned the miraculous things about the body, and it's not a short list. I mean, it's a really long list. But one of them is you think of these blood vessels in the brain as being pipes like in your bathroom that sort of carry the water from point A to point B. And it's really much more miraculous than that. They are pipes, but they're living and breathing pipes, and they are able to sense when one part of the brain needs more blood flow. They dilate, they relax to allow more blood to reach that part of the brain. When another part of the brain doesn't really need so much blood flow, they'll constrict so as not to sort of waste the blood supply to where it's not needed and direct it to where it is needed. But what we know about both of these small vessel diseases, I mentioned arteriolosclerosis and amyloid angiopathy, is they both kill off the cells that make that living and breathing blood vessel wall. So it raises the question of whether the small vessel diseases impair that vascular reactivity, the ability of blood vessels to react to how much blood supply is needed. And that is something that can be tested, again, using a different kind of MRI scan called functional MRI. So our patients will watch a screen that has a visual stimulus. It's kind of a flashing checkerboard. And then we can measure how much blood is reaching the visual part of the brain during that stimulation. And what we see is really quite an interesting finding. So what you're looking at here, that salmon color is the normal response, our healthy elderly controls who don't have our disease amyloid angiopathy. So when in the gray zone, that's when the flashing checkerboard is going. And that increase that you see is the increased blood supply taking place to the visual parts of the brain. And in blue is the same response, but now in our patients with advanced amyloid angiopathy. And you see there still is a response, it still does go up, but it's both a lower response, a lower amplitude response, and it's also a slower response. It gets the timing a little bit wrong. So we measure something called the time to peak as well as the peak amplitude, and both of them are off. So we have this idea that the reactivity is still there, but is a little bit off, is a little bit mismatched. That fine precision and the amount of the response are both affected. So, so to answer the question of mechanism, we think that first that small distributed injuries cause brain disconnection, and that impaired vascular activity is probably not the whole story, but we have good reason to think that it's at least an important part of the story, this kind of mismatch. Well, so it really turns now in the last few slides of my talk to what can we do to prevent age-related cognitive impairment. And I'll start with what's called the Life Simple 7 from the American Heart Association. I was thinking that conducting an orchestra probably ought to be number 8 on the list, except it's not simple, so it probably doesn't belong on the list. But this is the attempts of the American Heart Association, which has played a leading role in both, as is in the name, both in heart disease, but also in is the leading nonprofit organization trying to improve stroke and vascular health. And this is their list. And I think whenever doctors are the same as everybody else, whenever you see a list like this, you start thinking, well, I'm pretty good at that. I'm pretty good. Oh, not so good at that one. These are meant to be steps in terms of everyday lifestyle that can be taken to improve heart health. And the two to focus on. Well, I've already mentioned it with regard to that arteriolosclerosis earlier, is managing blood pressure and reducing blood sugar. So in other words, the effects of high blood pressure and of diabetes on the small blood vessels of the brain. And this blood pressure question has sort of been batted back and forth is how much blood pressure is too high? Is there such a thing as too low? And there's maybe not a great quote from I think this is the Duchess of Windsor said, you can't be too rich or too thin. And I don't know if those are good expressions, but we say you basically can't have too low a blood pressure up to a fair point. So these are the categories, and they're really set up by the American Heart Association. It really sets up a challenge to us as individuals and from a public health standpoint to try to reach these goals that even blood pressures that not that long ago people would have said, oh yes, you're fine, don't worry about that. We say, well, if you can get a little lower, you'll probably improve your heart health and your brain health. So a few caveats at the bottom. So first, this refers to resting blood pressure, that it's normal and healthy for blood pressure to rise with exertion during physical activity, sexual activity. We don't worry about the rises in blood pressure that are normal. It's really that resting one that counts, the one when you're sort of sitting around minding your own business. That's the blood pressure that your blood vessels are being exposed to time in and time out. And this also sort of covers the well-known phenomenon of white coat hypertension that everyone's familiar with. Your blood pressure is great till you go into the doctor and then, whoa, I don't feel so good now, and it goes up. And we tend not to worry about that, and that's why I think increasingly we recommend that people check their own blood pressures at home in their own environment. And the automated blood pressure monitors that are available are pretty good. If you're kind of worried about yours, you can go in and have it calibrated by checking it against the manual blood pressure you get in the doctor's office. But in general, they're pretty accurate. And really what we encourage people to do is to keep a list of what their blood pressures are at home when they're in their normal environment, living their normal life, and then to come into their doctors with that list. And that's really much more valuable than the one blood pressure reading you get when you go into the doctor's office, and again, maybe have just been sitting in traffic as you do in Boston, or are anxious and ill at ease. And the line about you can't be too low, I mean, it's really only too low when you have symptoms. So sometimes people are taking your blood pressure medicine say, oh, whenever I stand up, I start to get woozy, that I'm going to pass out, and that really is too low. I mean, that. But short of that, there really aren't readings where we say, oh gosh, we better try to increase this. And to a first approximation, again, lower is better, and better both for heart health and for brain health. So, and to look at some other kind of practical day-to-day issues that come up, we don't recommend routine MRI scans. That really has not been part of any recommendation. I don't think it's practical or cost-effective. But on the other hand, when people have an MRI done for any reason, these silent findings, such as silent strokes or that white matter, hyperintensity, I mentioned that scarring in the brain, should be taken seriously. And it's now guidelines to at least go on a search for modifiable risk factors in people who have incidental findings on their MRI. People often ask about diets and supplements, and there's not a specific one for the small vessel diseases that we know of. So it's the same heart-healthy diet, which is, again, I think familiar to people, high in fruits and vegetables, low in saturated fats, low in sugar, and low in salt, that appears to be optimal both for blood vessel health as well as for heart health. And a really tough question that I won't go into is, I mentioned the risk of bleeding related to small blood vessel disease in the brain, and a question that we get asked increasingly is, wait a second, I need to be on a blood thinner for some other reason, but on the other hand, I'm worried about bleeding. How do I balance those two things? And that's really become a big part of our clinical practice, is trying to come up with the best balance to steer your ship between those two competing risks of bleeding or of too much clotting. So there's not a simple answer to that, but it is a discussion worth having. So that's the sort of what's available now. So what are future goals? Where can we go? And really what we want, the holy grail for us in neurologic disease in general, is what we call disease-modifying therapies, that therapies that don't just treat symptoms, but really change the trajectory of diseases. And you can go down the list of, as neurologists, whatever disease you can think of, we've got one that's worse, and there are ones that people are familiar with. We talked about Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease are all really challenging diseases. And the goal, of course, is to do clinical trials of promising treatments. So identify ones that work and then incorporate them into practice. And of course, clinical trials are easy to conceive of and really hard to actually carry out. And one effort I've been involved with that Jeremy mentioned in his kind introduction is this MARC VCID Biomarkers Consortium. So this was an effort by the National Institutes of Health to improve our ability to have biomarkers, the kinds of things I mentioned, microbleeds and microinfarcts, things that we can look at to know whether a clinical trial is on the right track. And so this consortium consists of 7 sites. Some of the sites themselves consist of multiple sub-sites, with the goal to identify and validate biomarkers so that they're ready to go into clinical trials, so that we can say that we know that these biomarkers are measurable and do what we want and can be used in a trial. The structure of the consortium is to spend 2 years sort of refining the candidates, and then the last 3 years, which we're just now about to enter, to validate the markers across sites. I have a picture from our last meeting as part of the International Stroke meeting in Los Angeles. And this is, it's not my money to spend, but I think the goal is that years 6 to 10, in other words, year 6 of a 5-year program should be treatment trials that are based on these biomarkers. So to summarize, what can we do? Well, right now we have things like heart-healthy lifestyle, and the foundation is really in place for identifying new disease-modifying treatments. And just to close with what I think is a very hopeful slide, this is work from the Framingham Heart Study, showing that, I mentioned the tsunami of dementia that is coming because of aging of the population. But if we ignore that for a second and say, all right, for any given age group, how likely are people to have dementia? It seems to be going down, and we don't know why this is. Of course, we're happy to see it because, as I mentioned, any small change has enormous public health impact, but this is coinciding with improvements in vascular health, that we've gotten much better, as I mentioned, at identifying high blood pressure and treating it, and the number of strokes have gone down over the same time period, and it seems like dementia for any given age group is also coming down. So I think there really is reason to hope that not only can we come up with new treatments, but that existing treatments in particular, identifying, treating high blood pressure and other heart healthy steps may be having an impact even as we speak. So that's an optimistic note. I'll put up my last optimistic slide, which is really beautiful data showing the correlation between per capita chocolate consumption and per capita Nobel Prizes. And I think, I'll just say, I think the public health implications are quite clear. So anyway, I thank you very much for your time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Greenberg. I feel like you've given us some wonderful ideas really on the frontiers of dementia research, and really very exciting. We have a small gift, token of our appreciation for you coming again. Let's give him a warm round of applause. Thank you so much. Yeah, it should be chocolate, huh? We'll have to get you some of that before you go. I want to just appreciate all those that have taken part in our program tonight. In fact, I didn't mention, I thought this was just amazing to watch this orchestra play up here. And we're here because we love older adults. We study, we teach, we try to understand. And here they are right in front of us doing wonderful, amazing things and great examples to us. So I really appreciate them coming tonight and sharing their talents with us. Our conference will continue again tomorrow morning at 11 on the 3rd floor of the Wilkinson Student Center with 3 breakout sessions, and you see this in the program. One by Dr. Greenberg on taking the shortcut, biomarkers for cerebral small vessel disease. One by Dr. Scott Sanders on when there is no local doctor or store, new strategies in healthcare and service access for aging rural communities. And the last one by Dr. Johnny Chaston on engineering beneficial microbes to promote animal longevity, first steps in the fruit fly Drosophila melanogaster. Thank you again for coming tonight. Our closing prayer will be offered by a Gerentology Scholarship recipient majoring in public health, Kevin Moncada.
Our dear Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us to come together and discuss new ways in which we can help each other and help our beloved elderly. We ask that you can allow us to serve more fervently, to be better caregivers, families, and friends. We ask that you can bless our visitors and that everyone can return home safely. Please bless our refreshments and every step that we take. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.